The city was alive with the sounds of the marketplace, traders shouting, children laughing, coins clinking, but beneath that hum of life, something dark was spreading, unseen and unstoppable. It didn't march with banners or clash with swords. It whispered, "The king is dead." One voice, trembling, passed it to another and another. By the time it reached the city gates, it had grown into a storm of panic. Soldiers abandoned their posts. Merchants shuttered their stalls. Priests claimed to see omens of doom in the sky. And just like that, a mighty empire began to crack, not from war, but from a single rumor planted by an unseen hand. Empires are not always destroyed by armies. Sometimes they are destroyed by words. This is the story of a spy whose weapon was fear itself, a master manipulator who toppled a kingdom without ever lifting a sword. Before we dive deep into this tale of deception and chaos, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments below. And while you're at it, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends who love history, and subscribe so you never miss these untold spy stories. Centuries ago, this ancient empire was a symbol of wealth and stability. Its walls were tall, its armies vast, and its treasury overflowing. The people believed their king to be chosen by the gods themselves, a ruler who could not be defeated, a protector of their way of life. To outsiders, it seemed unshackable, invincible. But like all great powers, its greatest weakness was hidden inside its own borders, the minds of its people. All it would take was one spark to set their faith ablaze in chaos. That spark came in the form of a man whose name history would never record. He was no general, no noble, not even a soldier. He was a shadow, a spy trained not to fight battles with blades, but with information. His mission was simple, yet devastating. Infiltrate the heart of the empire and spread carefully crafted lies that would eat away at the trust binding its people together. If he succeeded, the empire would fall into ruin without his masters ever needing to invade. If he failed, his name and life would vanish into the darkness. He arrived under the guise of a traveling merchant, blending into the bustling streets with a smile that hid a calculating mind. His first move wasn't to shout lies in the open. No, he understood that the most dangerous rumor doesn't start loud. It begins as a whisper, soft enough to be mistaken for truth. He befriended local traders, drank with soldiers, made offerings at the temples, always listening, always learning. In the shadows, he studied the fears and ambitions of those around him. One night, as the city celebrated a festival honoring their gods, he made his first move. In a crowded tavern, he leaned close to a drunken soldier and murmured, "They say the king has been gravely ill, but they're hiding it. If he dies, who will lead us?" The soldier, too drunk to think clearly, repeated it to his comrades. By dawn, the tavern talk had spread through the barracks, evolving into, "The king is dead. The generals are hiding it." Panic began to flicker, faint but visible. Over the next weeks, the spy carefully fanned the flames. He fed merchants tales of foreign invasions, whispered to priests about cursed omens, and hinted to soldiers that their generals were plotting betrayal. Each rumor was tailored to its audience, each one calculated to sow mistrust. None of it was shouted from rooftops. It spread through temples, markets, and barracks, quietly weaving itself into the fabric of daily life until no one could tell where truth ended and lies began. The king's court began to feel the pressure. Reports of unrest poured in from across the kingdom. Cities closed their gates out of fear. Farmers abandoned their fields, convinced that invaders were coming. Even the royal army began to fracture, as soldiers accused their commanders of treachery. Every decision the king made was questioned, every word he spoke twisted by rumor. He was a ruler surrounded not by loyal subjects, but by walls of paranoia. And still, the spy remained hidden, watching as his lies did the work for him. He didn't need to strike the king himself. The people would do it for him. They would tear their own empire apart with fear and suspicion. By now, even the most faithful subjects had begun to waver. The gods are angry, the priests declared during ceremonies. Our king has lost their favor. This was no coincidence. The spy had made certain that sacred temples were filled with false visions and staged omens. A sudden eclipse, a prophecy written on ancient scrolls, all carefully arranged to make the people believe doom was inevitable. The most chilling part? Even the king's advisors began to suspect one another. They whispered in shadowed hallways, convinced there were traitors among them, never realizing that the real traitor was outside their walls, orchestrating the chaos. The empire's enemies could scarcely believe their luck. Their armies remained on the borders, waiting as the city consumed itself. Every day, the spies' lies grew more elaborate, more convincing. Fear had become a disease, spreading faster than any army could march. And then, one final rumor, the deadliest of them all, was unleashed. A whisper that would push the kingdom over the edge, ensuring its destruction forever. The spy had spent months preparing for this moment, carefully planting seeds of doubt in the minds of generals, priests, and commoners alike. Now, with a single calculated lie, he would light the match that would burn an empire to ashes. The whisper began in a crowded marketplace. The king has betrayed us. He has struck a deal with our enemies. By nightfall, the streets were filled with mobs demanding the king's death. Armories were raided, fires burned across the city, and neighbors turned on neighbors, each accusing the other of treachery. In the royal palace, the king stood isolated, surrounded by guards who no longer trusted him. His empire was collapsing, not from an invading army, but from within. And somewhere in the shadows, the spy watched it all unfold, a faint smile on his lips. His work was almost done. This is how revolutions begin, not with battles, but with whispers. Whispers that grow into storms, storms that topple thrones. And as this empire teetered on the brink of destruction, one question remained. Could anyone uncover the truth before it was too late? The city burned with the fire of suspicion, its people choking on fear as surely as they would on smoke. What had once been a beacon of stability now trembled beneath the weight of lies. Streets once filled with merchants and laughter were now battlegrounds for mobs, shouting accusations they no longer even understood. Soldiers patrolled in fractured units, each group suspecting the others of treason. And at the center of this storm stood a figure no one suspected, the spy. He moved through the chaos with careful precision, unseen and untouchable. By day, he was a humble merchant, wringing his hands and shaking his head at the kingdom's misfortune. By night, he was a puppeteer, pulling invisible strings to tighten the noose around the king's throat. The beauty of his plan lay in its simplicity. He did not need to destroy the empire himself. He only needed to convince the people that destruction was inevitable. Once they believed that, they would finish the job for him. Every riot, every torch, every dagger raised in fear, they were weapons forged by his lies. Weeks earlier, when his mission had begun, he had carefully mapped the fault lines within the kingdom. Rival noble houses vying for power, religious factions at odds over prophecy, generals bitter about court politics. He didn't create these tensions, he merely magnified them, whispering the right words to the right ears at the right time. To a disillusioned soldier, he said, "Your commander has been secretly negotiating with the enemy. He'll sacrifice you in the next battle." To a wealthy merchant, he confided, "The king plans to seize your wealth to fund a war. Hide your treasures before it's too late." To a priest, he murmured, "The signs are clear. The gods have turned their backs on the king." Each rumor was like a spark cast into a dry forest. Alone, harmless. Together, unstoppable. But as the chaos grew, so too did the spy's challenge. Lies, like wildfire, are difficult to control once they spread too far. Even he began to hear rumors he hadn't planted, stories mutating beyond recognition as terrified citizens added their own fears and suspicions. It was both thrilling and dangerous. He had built a storm, but could he steer it? One night, under a blood-red moon, he attended a secret meeting of influential nobles. Hidden beneath a hood, he played his role as a trusted advisor, feeding them carefully chosen intelligence. The nobles were already on edge, desperate to protect their power. "The king is no longer fit to rule," one snarled. "If we do nothing, this chaos will destroy us all," another whispered, trembling. "But what if he still lives by the gods' favor? What if we bring doom upon ourselves?" The spy struck then, his voice calm, but heavy with false certainty. "I have seen the signs. The gods have abandoned him. The people know it. If you delay, the mob will turn on you next. Act now, and you can save the kingdom and yourselves." By the end of the night, the nobles had made a fateful decision. They would move against the king. The spy left the meeting with a smile hidden beneath his hood. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. What would you have done in this situation? Trusted your king despite the rumors, or joined the conspirators before it was too late? Share your thoughts below. Meanwhile, inside the royal palace, the king sat in his private chambers, surrounded by advisors who argued and bickered like frightened children. Reports of uprisings flooded in from every corner of the kingdom. Entire garrisons had defected, convinced their generals were traitors. Even the palace guard had splintered into factions, some loyal to the king, others plotting against him. The king's most trusted advisor, a man who had served his family for decades, fell to his knees. "Your Majesty," he begged, "you must speak to the people directly. Assure them that you are still their rightful ruler." The king's eyes were hollow, his voice heavy with despair. "And if they no longer believe me? If they think my words are lies?" Silence followed. Even the advisors who had not yet betrayed him could not answer. The power of the throne rested not on swords or gold, but on faith. And that faith had been poisoned beyond repair. The spy's strategy was nearly complete. All that remained was to ensure the final blow, the one lie that would shatter the last threads holding the kingdom together. To do this, he needed to act boldly. He staged a false message, written in the king's own handwriting, claiming allegiance with the kingdom's enemies. Then, under the cover of darkness, he placed it where it would be discovered by a palace servant. By dawn, the forged letter was in the hands of the nobles, and within hours it had spread to the streets. The effect was immediate and devastating. Citizens flooded the palace gates, screaming for the king's head. Soldiers deserted en masse, convinced they had been betrayed by the ruler. Temples declared the king cursed, while rival claimants to the throne began gathering their own forces. By now, the lies were so thick, even the truth sounded like deception. If the king himself had stood before the mob and sworn his innocence, they would have called it another trick. Fear had become the only reality. As fires consumed the city, the spy moved through the chaos one final time, ensuring that his masters, the empire's enemies, were ready to march in and claim the ruins. He paused on a hill overlooking the burning capital. Below him, the people tore each other apart, their screams mingling with the crackle of flames. This was the power of his craft. No army could have breached these walls so quickly. No general could have conquered this kingdom so completely. It had destroyed itself, guided only by the whispers of a single man. But even as he reveled in his success, a question lingered in his mind. Had he gone too far? Lies had toppled the throne, but they now had a life of their own. Even he could no longer predict where they would lead. The revolution he had sparked was no longer under his control, and the forces he had unleashed were about to turn on everyone, including him. The city was drowning in chaos. Thick columns of black smoke curled into the sky, blotting out the afternoon sun as if the heavens themselves were mourning the death of a kingdom. Streets that once rang with the lively sounds of merchants and children now echoed with the screams of mobs and the clash of steel. The once proud capital was now a battlefield of paranoia and rage, and at the heart of it all was a single man, a shadow no one saw coming. From the ruins of a collapsed watchtower, the spy stood silently, his hood pulled low, watching the destruction he had unleashed. His plan had worked better than he ever dared to hope. The forged letter he had planted, claiming the king had made a secret pact with their greatest enemy, had been the final blow to a fragile realm already teetering on fear. Overnight, faith in the crown had dissolved into bloodlust. Nobles turned on one another, priests declared divine wrath, and the army shattered into splintered factions. It was beautiful in its precision, or at least it had been. Now, something darker was happening. Rumors were spreading that he had never created. They were wild, chaotic, mutating like a disease as terrified citizens added their own fears and hatred to the mix. The spy no longer needed to whisper lies. The people were doing it for him, fueling the storm until it became unstoppable. The empire wasn't merely collapsing, it was devouring itself. Two dominant factions now ruled the burning city. The first were the loyalists, desperate to save the king and what remained of the old order. The second were the rebels, convinced the king had betrayed them and eager to destroy every trace of his rule. Between these two, rivers of blood flowed through the streets. The spy moved between them like a phantom, feeding both sides just enough poison to keep the war raging. To the loyalists, he posed as a messenger, warning them of rebel plots that didn't exist. To the rebels, he became a trusted voice, urging them to strike quickly and decisively. Every word he spoke drove the city closer to annihilation. One night, as flames devoured the sacred temple district, the rebel leaders gathered for a secret council. These were once the most powerful figures in the realm, generals, priests, and nobles who had guided the empire's fate. Now they were conspirators, their robes smeared with ash and blood, their eyes wild with fear and ambition. "The people demand justice," one priest roared, his fist slamming the table. "We must execute the king at dawn to prove we are the chosen of the gods," a general snarled in response. "Justice won't stop our enemies from marching through these gates. Without an army, this city will fall within days. We need to secure our power now." Their voices clashed like swords, the council descending into chaos. The spy, hidden beneath a hood at the edge of the room, waited for the perfect moment. When silence finally fell, he stepped forward and spoke with calm authority. "The enemy's army is already marching." He lied smoothly, his voice steady. "Even now, they move toward the capital. If you hesitate, they will take the city before you establish control. You must strike now, not only at the king, but at everyone still loyal to him. Leave no room for doubt." Fear gripped the council. By dawn, their course was set, a purge of every royal supporter, starting with the palace. Inside that palace, the king's world was crumbling. Once filled with courtiers and loyal guards, the halls were now ghostly and silent, lit only by the flickering glow of torches. The king paced before his shattered throne, his robes torn and his crown askew. Around him, his last few advisors argued bitterly, while the remaining guards clutched their weapons, unsure whom to trust. "Your Majesty," his most loyal advisor pleaded, falling to his knees, "you must flee. There is still time to escape the city and rally forces beyond the capital." The king shook his head, his voice hoarse. "If I run, it will prove every lie they've told about me. My people must see me stand firm." "Stand firm?" Another advisor spat. "They no longer see you as their king. They see you as a traitor." The king's eyes filled with despair. Deep down, he knew it was true. Even if he stood before the mob and spoke the truth, they would twist his words into more lies. His throne was not built on gold or armies. It was built on belief, and belief was gone. While the king wrestled with his fate, the spy prepared for his final move. Months of careful manipulation had led to this moment, and one last act would seal the empire's doom. He disguised himself as a servant and slipped into the palace under cover of darkness. Moving silently, he planted false evidence of treachery among the king's few remaining allies. Forged letters, foreign coins, and even a blood-stained dagger hidden in a guard's quarters. By dawn, the king would suspect his own men, while the guards would suspect him. Paranoia would shatter the last fragile ties of loyalty. But as he worked, he overheard two young servants whispering nearby. "They say the king still prays for us every night," one said softly. The other scoffed. "Prayers won't stop the mob from tearing us apart." "No," the first replied, voice trembling. "But maybe he still believes in us. Maybe we've been wrong about him." The spy froze. For the first time, guilt stirred in his heart. These were ordinary people, caught in a web of lies they didn't deserve. He had always told himself that his actions served a greater purpose: stability, victory for his masters. But now he wondered if he was nothing more than a destroyer, leaving only ashes behind. The next day, the purge began. Rebels stormed the palace, slaughtering anyone suspected of loyalty to the king. The royal defenders, already fractured by suspicion, fell quickly. In the throne room, the king was dragged before the mob, his crown ripped away and trampled underfoot. As the crowd raised their weapons to strike, a single voice cut through the chaos. The young servant. "Listen to me," they cried. "We are being deceived. These are lies meant to divide us." For a heartbeat, the mob froze. Doubt flickered in their eyes. The spy, hidden among the crowd, felt his stomach lurch. Everything he had built could crumble if the servant's words took hold. Acting on instinct, he drew a dagger and struck swiftly. The servant collapsed, their voice silenced forever. The mob roared in outrage, but their fury was turned not on the spy, but on the king. The king's assassins strike even now. Someone shouted. The crowd surged forward, their rage renewed. The king's screams were drowned beneath the roar of the mob. Moments later, the ruler of the empire lay dead, his blood pooling on the marble floor. By nightfall, the city was unrecognizable. Rebel factions turned on each other, each claiming to be the rightful heir. Fires consumed entire districts. What little remained of the royal army either fled or joined the chaos. From a distant hill, the spy watched the burning capital. His mission was complete. Without ever raising a sword, he had destroyed an empire using nothing but whispers. And yet, as he gazed at the devastation, there was no satisfaction. His chest felt hollow, his hands cold. Lies, he realized, could never be truly controlled. They grew wild, twisting into new shapes, devouring everything, even the one who created them. Do you think they still believed they were safe? Or was the end already closing in? Share your thoughts below. As he turned to leave, a new whisper reached his ears. It spoke not of kings or traitors, but of a faceless shadow, a spy who had brought ruin to them all. His name would never be known, but his legend would live on. For generations, people would speak of the day a mighty empire fell, not to an invading army, but to a single man with a single weapon, a whisper. And somewhere in the darkness, the spy realized a chilling truth. One day, his masters might fall to the very lies they had trained him to wield. The city was eerily silent in the early hours before dawn. The fires that had raged through the night were now little more than smoldering embers, glowing faintly like the last breaths of a dying beast. Where once proud banners had flown, only tattered scraps of fabric fluttered weakly in the wind. The empire that had stood unshaken for centuries was gone, not defeated by an enemy army, but torn apart from within by a single devastating force. Rumors, carefully planted and relentlessly nurtured by a master spy. The spy stood at the edge of the ruined throne room, his boots crunching over shards of marble and broken crowns. The air reeked of blood and smoke. This was the culmination of his work, the perfect storm he had engineered through deceit and manipulation. A kingdom destroyed without a single battle. And yet, as he gazed upon the chaos, there was no pride in his heart, only a growing, suffocating emptiness. The king's body still lay where it had fallen, surrounded by the shattered remnants of his throne. His face, once revered by millions, was twisted in terror and disbelief. Even in death, he seemed unable to comprehend how it had come to this. His blood had dried in dark rivulets across the marble floor, stark against the white stone like a final, unspoken warning. The spy knelt briefly beside the fallen ruler, staring into those lifeless eyes. For months, he had imagined this moment bringing him a sense of victory. Instead, all he felt was a gnawing sense of unease. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," he whispered, his voice trembling. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. From the very first whisper, from the very first forged letter, this had been inevitable. Lies were never tools to be wielded. They were weapons with wills of their own, and once released, they could not be controlled. Beyond the palace walls, a city had descended into complete anarchy. Rebel leaders who had once stood united against the crown now turned on each other in a vicious struggle for dominance. Neighborhoods fell under the rule of rival warlords. What remained of the royal army had either fled or splintered into mercenary bands, selling their swords to the highest bidder. And among the people, the rumors raged louder than ever. Some whispered that the king had been a demon in disguise, slain by divine intervention. Others claimed he still lived, plotting vengeance from the shadows. Each new lie fed the chaos, until truth itself became meaningless. The spy wandered through the streets unseen, his hood pulled low. Everywhere he looked, he saw the results of his work. Families torn apart, temples desecrated, children huddling in fear as mobs rampaged past their doors. Once, he had believed his mission served a greater purpose: the fall of a tyrant, the rise of a new and just order. But now, staring into the hollow, desperate faces of the innocent, he could no longer lie to himself. There would be no new order. There would only be ashes. As the sun began to rise, the spy reached the edge of the city and looked back one final time. The capital was a silhouette of ruin against the fiery horizon, its towers crumbling like the bones of a long-dead giant. "This is what power truly looks like," he murmured bitterly. "Not crowns or armies, just belief. And belief is the easiest thing to destroy." Behind him, a rustling sound broke the silence. A figure emerged from the shadows, a messenger from the very masters who had sent him on this mission. The spy recognized the insignia immediately and felt a cold, bitter laugh rising in his throat. "You came to congratulate me?" he asked, his voice hollow. The messenger shook his head. "No, I came to deliver new orders. There's another empire, another target. Your talents are needed elsewhere." The spy turned away, his jaw tightening. Another target, another empire to poison, another generation to suffer under the weight of his lies. "No," he said quietly. "This was my last mission." The messenger frowned. "You don't have a choice." The spy looked back at the burning city one final time, then vanished into the morning mist. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't return to the shadows that had shaped him. Somewhere, far from the wreckage, he would try to become something more than a whisper in the dark. But deep down, he feared it was already too late. Years later, when scholars tried to piece together the story of the empire's fall, they would argue endlessly about what had truly happened. Some would blame political corruption, others foreign interference. But among the common people, one tale endured: the legend of a faceless spy who had destroyed a kingdom with nothing but rumors. The story grew over time, reshaped by each generation until the spy himself became more myth than man. Children were warned, beware the whisperer in the dark, for his lies can topple thrones. Kings trembled at the thought that somewhere, unseen, someone like him might still be plotting their doom. And so, though his name was forgotten, his legacy endured, not as a hero, or even as a villain, but as a shadow. A reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, was safe from the deadliest weapon of all, belief twisted into fear. The spy himself? No one truly knows what became of him. Some say he wandered the earth, haunted by the ghosts of the world he had destroyed. Others claim he returned to the shadows, unable to resist the only life he had ever known. But one thing is certain, the lies he set in motion never truly died. They lived on, passed from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, shaping history in ways no sword ever could. And with that, the narrator's voice whispers, the spy's empire of secrets finally collapsed, leaving a legacy written in betrayal. If this story kept you hooked till the very end, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who loves untold spy stories, and subscribe right now, because the next case we uncover might be even more shocking.